Marvin, 50 years, the art of leather. You know, when you started doing this 50 years ago, Marvin, did you see this as your career path?
Not even remotely. It was, reflecting back, and this, year has given me time to reflect back on the various phases of this journey. It started when I was a student at Columbia, and my roommate, actually Larry Frazier, was working on a leather kit he had from Tandy. He was making a bag for his mother, I think for a Christmas gift. And I just happened to be coming home while he was sitting in the living room floor, and walked by him and looked over his shoulder at what he was doing. And then I did a double take. I backed up and looked again. And I saw that the leather he was using, he was tooling the leather. He was putting an impression in the leather. And I stood there for a minute and looked at him, and it kind of caught my eye. So I asked him about it, and he told me he got this from Tandy. So the next day I went down to Tandy and bought a skin of leather just to experiment. And I was always kind of into drawing. I was just starting to try painting. I was trying to do a little sculpting and carving. And I saw that in this leather, I could do all four of those in this one medium. So that really caught my attention. So I went down, and by hook or crook, I don't know, I made a bag. I invented a bag. I wish I still had it, but it got away. And that kind of opened the door. But it was just, a fluke, a hobby. One thing I tell people is like, in New York, I never felt that artists were really respected or got the recognition they deserved. So, I always kind of had this as a side endeavor. And I was really working in politics and cultural arts promotion, not as an artist, but an art advocate. Never thinking of myself as being an artist, but I admired the artists, the arts community, the cultural community, because I was working in politics and saw those people. I was working in the business community, saw those people. I was working in the civil rights advocacy community. I was working for CORE for a minute. I saw those people, and then I saw the people in art and culture, and it was just a higher grade of of human beings, just what they were thinking about, how they interacted with each other, just the spirit was totally different. So, I recognized that there was more power in culture than these other arenas that most people are, preoccupied with. So it's like the idea of doing this, as a profession never occurred to me. So actually, my name, and most people don't know this, is Marvin Sinclair Kelly. M-Sin was like an abbreviation of my, first initial and middle name, Sin, M-Sin.
Okay.
So you can see it here, M-Sin. So for the first 10, 15 years, this is how people knew me, M-Sin. It wasn't like I got to Chicago with Val Ward that she was the first person to call me Marvin Sin. I'd never even heard of that. It never been uttered before, so I became, through that, Marvin Sin, and used that as my trade name ever since.
So let's talk about, so your career really started in New York?
It started in New York, and I was making bags. My first, kind of boost came, I had just designed these series of Zodiac note cards, and back in the late 60s, early 70s, that was real. People had discovered astrology. Everybody knew their sign, wanted to get their chart done. So this first set of bags was, I would put people's name on the top flap and a picture of their sign underneath it. So like Bruce, Scorpio,
okay,
Barbara, Libra, and those bags were like instant hits. So that took me into a rhythm where, I could do these, and I think those bags, I was selling them, I'm pretty sure, for like $75. If I was to do one today, it would be $800. those, and I did tons of them.
Okay.
But that was rent money, because at that time my share of the rent was $75. So do a bag, pay the rent. So that was, I think, the beginning of it. But the artists in Harlem, basically, who inspired me were the Way You See artists. These brothers were doing, they're like, it's a collective of artists. They had a gallery in a brownstone in Harlem. And, I mean, they were just, I kind of admired their style. They were phenomenal artists, but really nice people. And they had such a professional presentation of their work. It was like a very high standard of presentation, even though they were doing exhibits on the street. So my first piece of art was like a $10 print that I bought from one of these brothers. And that kind of drew me into the universe. But what I noticed, though, was that as I looked at visual artists, painters, the system, the economic system that they were stepping into was not supportive of their work. In fact, to be a painter, a visual artist, basically you are hoping one day to get into a major group show. You are hoping one day to have a gallery exhibition of your work. You are hoping one day to be included in a museum exhibition, maybe one piece, one or two pieces. And then you are hoping one day to, to have your work represented by a major gallery. But it was only when you died that your work really became, popularized and well known, and the people who collected your work may have benefited. But during your life, you were struggling and basically selling a piece here, a piece there, and it just didn't seem that was a workable formula.
So what would you say was the thing that prompted you to take another step?
Well, I had the acumen for promotion, so I was looking at the marketing aspect of all of this. This is the Black Cultural Revolution that was in the air, and in the African tradition, art is not what we call fine art. It's not something you put on your wall in your living room. It's something that you use in your everyday life. So I was looking for how could I apply my art and my creativity to a functional form. And the bags was a natural, so that gave us the concept of wearable art. And we coined that phrase. This was art that you wore, and the advantage of that was that the art was always on display. When I did several paintings, but when I did a painting and somebody bought it, it went to their living room, and only their friends and family would ever see that again. I would never even see it again. If I did a bag and put it on a sister's shoulder, that bag was out in the world, and wherever that person went, that art was being displayed and shared and seen by people. And we come to understand later that the patron of the art is simply a participant in the process of how spirit is shared. Spirit comes through us as artists to be manifest into the world, because that energy is needed. It heals, it uplifts, it inspires, but it doesn't do anything that if it's in somebody's closet or in somebody's living room. But if it's in the world, the more people see it, the more people who are impacted by that imagery and that spirit and that intentionality to reflect our people in this highest elevation. So it was all of that, and it was in New York, basically, that I became an artist. Working with a group of artists, we call ourselves a Reflection Art Gallery on 120th Street. I think it was Grace Williams and Arnold Hinton, Dinga McCannon, Linda Hiwart, and a couple other folks. We just gathered around this gallery, and it was the first time I took myself seriously as an artist in terms of, well, okay, okay, that's what I am, okay. So started exhibiting my work and taking it seriously as a representation of that profession and what that really meant in the world. And again, because I was in New York, it was still kind of, to the side, because in New York, if you're an artist, people look down on you. It's not a matter, a career of respect, unless you're already celebrated and famous. But to be creating art, yeah. And New York kind of, the energy, the spirit, the pace of New York kind of wore me out after a while. And I had to leave New York. I ran away. I escaped. And it was in 77. So I left New York and went directly to Festac in Lagos. Wow. The story of that can never be told. I mean, just never. To see the whole African world, all of it, in one place at one time, it's like,
Wow.
And our magnificence, our diversity, our intensity, and what Nigeria did. I mean, to have fleets of Festac cars and buses and minivans, to have a village of housing of Festac, to have Festac toilet paper. I mean, it was like, whew, never done, never can be done again. But to have been there was like life-changing and affirming. Came back, moved to Alexandria, Virginia, and that's when I started exhibiting my work, I guess. Larry Fraser turned me on to a brother in DC, Bernard Gray, who had the Maya Gallery downtown DC. Told me to go see him. I went to see Bernard. So I had this body of work that I had exhibited just before I left New York. And I came and met Bernard and said, humble, I didn't know what I was doing. I'd really like to do an exhibit at the gallery. I was wondering before I could finish. He said, when do you want to do it? We set a date. I did that show at Maya Gallery. It was my first solo exhibition in DC. It was well responded, and that's when I decided, okay, I can do this. And then in DC, met just the most amazing group of artists. And with my organizing background, we formed a Vision Collective of about 20 artists and art entrepreneurs, and started doing collective exhibitions. Holiday Expo we did 2 or 3 times. But the upshot of that is that every one of those participants is still doing art. And the benefit of the collective reinforcement of a group organization where everyone kind of, tells everyone else, yeah, keep on. And so everybody who was in that group is still doing art to this day. I can name them. Life lesson. And
so, I met you after all of this high energy New York, after going to DC, getting your first show. I really met you in Chicago. So here we are 50 years later, and you're in Chicago. Can you talk a little bit about what role Chicago played in your career?
Well, coming from New York, Chicago is like second place. I mean, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I heard about it. But I'm from New York, so you can't tell me anything. Chicago is nowhere on my radar, except that through doing conferences with organizations, the social workers, the doctors, psychiatrists, what I noticed was my sales were coming from people from Chicago. I'm looking at that. They were not from New York, not from California, but the bulk of the sales, and the big sales I'm looking at the addresses here. These people, it just so happened that Val Gray Ward came to DC looking for me. She called me up and said, we have to meet. Okay, yeah. So we met at the Harambe House Hotel down from Howard University. And she said, brother, you have to come to Chicago. No, you have to. You must come. I'm going to arrange a show for you, and you must come. Well, at the time, I had been doing private house parties in New York, and that was really what was keeping me going. So it was another, house party. Cool. Okay, so we set the date, and it just so happened that I missed my flight. It was, I think, on a Friday night. I missed the flight that would have gotten me there at about 6 or 7. And I called Val. I said, feeling really terrible. I missed the flight. I really can't make it. She said, no, take the next flight. I said, but that's not going to get me there until about 10 o'clock. She said, take the next flight. So, okay. I'm not knowing what I'm coming into, but yeah, hey, I made the commitment. So, I got on the next flight. I got in about 10. I got to the apartment, and this was Raynard and Ethel Hall's apartment. I got there, it must have been about 11 o'clock. The place was packed. And I'm like, well, what were they doing here? I didn't know they were waiting for me. And in the next hour, I made more money in the next hour than I had in any month of my life doing anything else. And it was like, whoa, what just happened? And it's impossible to explain the impact that Chicago has had on sustaining this journey. I tell people for 20 years, Chicago by itself kept me alive. Val hooked up with Babatunde and I, and we did the first show, I think, at the Hyde Park Hilton, outside around the pool. It was a great show. So then Tunde and I broke off, and we started doing shows at the Hilton 2 or 3 times a year, and it became the Ramada, and it became something. But we had a regular hit there. Those events were like legendary. I mean, it's just. But it was largely as a result of Val, and she basically took me to people's houses and introduced me to people who then became customers. Jackie Jackson took me to her house. The Gardeners from Soft Sheen. Helen Anglin from Soul Queen. I mean, just on and on and on. And each of these people became not just friends and customers, but referred other people, and just mushroomed and mushroomed. And Chicago is the first place that I felt respected as an artist. And I think people in Chicago kind of take this for granted, but I think it's because the culture is so strong here, because the community was intact so long here, whereas integration really kind of destroyed the institutional frameworks of most black communities. Because Chicago was so intensely segregated, the communities stayed together. And so you had, Muhammad Speaks, you had Johnson Publication, you had EPA, you had all this stuff, and I would tell people, it's like, you got an artist, Margaret Burroughs, who winds up, with nowhere else is that kind of spirit or determination. And as I look around in other cities, the heads of arts institutions in other cities are from Chicago, because the fusion of art, respect, and power, and knowing that you can do something. Hey, there's no big thing. Let's do. The Festac delegation, U.S. delegation, was led by Jeff Donaldson, Chicago. I mean, just so everywhere coming out of this city, it empowers an artist to think on a higher level. All the years I spent in D.C., I mean, I liked D.C., I liked the people, but it was never a supportive environment for me. And I know so many artists in D.C. who were never validated, who were never appreciated for their creativity, and stopped or just dejected, depressed. And I saw so many creative energies wither on the vine for lack of support. And I was trying to tell people, get to Chicago. In fact, one of the reasons that the African Festival of the Arts was originated because we were doing festivals in other cities, but there wasn't one in Chicago. Of all the places in the world, there's no, so a group of us got together to launch, a festival. And then we started telling other artists from other cities, you have to come to Chicago. And each of them in turn thanked us profusely because it helped their careers. And that's why, so many people are still alive and doing this work today. Chicago. That's all I can say. No place like it. And, to all the people in Chicago who supported and sustained me over the years, my deepest gratitude. If it was not for this place, this journey would have been cut short long ago.
Marvin, if you were speaking, and you are speaking, to young artists today, is there any word from a cultural perspective that you would give them?
Yes, Africa. If you are of African descent and you are not intensely connected to your African history and culture on all levels, you are denying yourself the highest plateau of existence possible. So embrace Africa as your source of inspiration. Anything else other than that is secondary or tertiary. Why would you leave the pinnacle to go to the basement? The other thing is, you can't do this by yourself. Most artists think it's an individual pursuit. Absurd. Look at Afro-Cobra, look at Wayusi, look at the arts organizations in New York, Where We At Women. Just look at NCA, look at the National Conference of Artists. The power of collective thinking, reinforcement, evaluating each other's work, of offering skills in a collective that no one person has. I mean, I was fortunate that I brought a promotional sense and a graphic sense to this enterprise, but if I didn't have that, hooking up with the Coastal, who has this sense of decor and presentation and retail ambiance, that's important. Marketing and relationships is important. And now you have the technology that's critical. And no one person, especially not an artist, should be asked to do all of these things. So you need that kind of grouping. The other thing is, this is an artist in DC, Malik Edwards, who said, somebody asked him, why his friends didn't buy his work. He said, if they don't buy my work, they're not my friends. He said, if they were my friends, they would buy my work. And so the first rung or tier or circle of patronage is going to be your family and your friends. And you can take that, ad infinitum. Don't try to go out into the marketplace here. People, nobody knows you, nobody cares about you, and try to, start with your base and build it. And then the other idea that, you want to be mainstream. I don't just want to do black art. The reason you do black art is because black people, black women especially, are the gold standard consumers on the planet. There's no other community anywhere in the world that will patronize and support and sustain you in your pursuit, no matter what it is, more loyally and consistently than black women. And if you bring integrity and respect and a dedication and a commitment to excellence, you cannot fail. In fact, your challenge is going to be grappling with your success that you don't know how to handle. But so those are the things. You can't do it alone. Embrace Africa, and definitely, build your enterprise close to home, because I tried selling in the so-called mainstream, and to this day, this is 50 years later, I have had fewer than 10 white customers.
Wow.
In 50 years, I have been supported solely and completely by my community, and no one else. And so the idea that you need to go here, go there, hey, I challenge the assumption, but do what you will. But I'm just saying, don't leave the gold mine going shopping for pennies. So these are things that you are born with, and whatever institution or gallery or market, they will embrace an artist for a time, and then they will cut you loose. And once they cut you loose, who's it? Carl Owens, an artist out of Detroit, told me, never release more than 25% of your marketing to anyone other than yourself. Always have 75% that you own and control. You can play around with the other 25%, because if something happens to that, you still have your solid base. But if you have all your eggs in somebody else's basket, and they decide to move to Afghanistan or get married or do something else, and and many times over the years, I've had sales reps who just changed life, who did something else, and that stream of revenue just disappeared. But it was not my only, and that happens. So, those are a couple of little things I would say to artists.
Well, Marvin, we appreciate you. We love you. You are our leather man.
Hey, trying to be.
And as a girlfriend of mine says, I said, come and celebrate Marvin, 50 years in the business. She said he must have been a toddler when he started.
Feels like it. There's one other thing I say. I don't share this often, but my partner in New York, Lloyd Williams, shared an idea with me that was kind of life transforming. He said, Kel, that's what he called me, Kel. He said, just as you're using your talent to make bags, you can use that same creative process to change the world.
All right.
Wait a minute. And with that germinated, and that set me on my life's course to use the creative process to transform the environments that I live and work in. And that's Black Gold. It was an attempt to superimpose our conception of art as a natural resource on a larger stage, not just in our neighborhoods, but nationally. In DC, we created the golden age of black art, GABA, that called on artists to design the future for African people worldwide. And so we're just thinking of how do we use this creative process to project it on larger and larger canvases, to have a real meaningful impact in our communities. The idea is that most people look up to the minister, the businessman, the politician for leadership. These are not our leaders. You cannot lead without imagination, without creativity, without vision. And I always look to the artists for that. So the challenge is always for artists to step out of the margin, step into the center, and hold the center, and project your ideas, your conceptualizations, your visions, your imagination, and let that heal our communities. Don't complain about what other people are doing, and those people don't know. You know that, so stop complaining about them and assume and accept the responsibility that's given to us by our ancestors to create what is necessary.
You know what? I want everybody to come out for the rest of the day and tomorrow and get under the tent with Marvin. You will not regret it. It will be transformative. Thank you so much for spending this time.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you. Love you.